Welcome to the Heart of Law podcast. My name is Mirena and I'm your host. Today, I have invited on the show Shelby Walton, personal injury attorney with the Haggard Law Firm in Miami, Florida. Shelby, a sharp and talented young lawyer, has extensive experience representing clients and achieving great results. Before entering private practice, Shelby spent 3 years as a trial attorney at the Miami-Dade Public Defender's Office. And during that time, Shelby led trial teams in over 25 jury trials, which is very impressive. Shelby, welcome to the Heart of Law. It's good to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Happy to be here and happy 2022. I think we're supposed to say that now, though. It's been kind of a crazy 6 days of a start to it. So
I know, I can't believe it. The holidays, as fun as they are, I was just exhausted. And I remember coming back from Christmas and New Year's and thinking, like, work is actually not so bad.
it's funny because at the end of 2021, kind of thinking back, I was like, or I think at the end of 2020, I was like, it can't get worse. I mean, things just have to get better at this point. And then just in November, December, I'm like, you know what? The year is over. 2022 has to be, it has to be better. The world has to go back to normal. And then January 1st hits and Omicron. I'm like, so we're looking at like 2025. I'm, looking forward to
Well, at this point, we just have to lose sense of time and just not worry about it because it's always something. One of the sad things actually for me was that before getting completely off subject was Betty White dying before she hit 100 because I was really looking forward to that.
If I can just say something very strange about that is, so the day before that news came out, I think an episode of Golden Girls came on or something. And I was like, man, is Betty White still alive? I was like, there's no way. There's no way. And then the next day, the news broke and I'm like, oh my God. I put some bad energy out there. So that was.
Well, no, all that means your intuition is right on point. That's crazy. So Shelby, I first met you at the annual Florida Justice event where you were one of the speakers. And you made an immediate impact on me. I was sitting there. I actually had come to listen to Chris Searcy because he's just like this incredible speaker. And, I sat down and then, I saw you come on stage and do a presentation. You're a very effective public speaker and, you have great energy, great clarity. Most importantly, you come across like you're very, very driven, which I say this all the time on the podcast. It's very refreshing to see the new generation of lawyers coming and rising and that don't carry the old baggage, the old industry conditioning, and are ready to prove themselves and break records. And I've had some incredible young lawyers that have done incredible things. Tell me a little bit about, yourself. Like, did you always know you'd be a lawyer? And, how did your education sort of lead you to law school and then, being a personal injury attorney today?
It seems like a really simple question, but I think it's pretty complicated because I think that when you find yourself at a place in life, at least for me, I try to look back and make sense of how I got here and, say that it was all supposed to happen and this is where I knew I was going to end up. But the reality is it really isn't true. To trace back my steps, it would be almost impossible. But, there's certain points in life where or at least I kind of think about the fact that I am where I'm supposed to be. And I can't always figure out how I got here, but to kind of give a little bit of a history, I went to undergrad in Boston and really had no idea what I wanted to do. I was an athlete, I was running track, was very focused on that. I was thinking about maybe doing bobsledding after school and I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. And kind of on a whim, I took the LSAT, trying to keep my options open and ended up spending some time working at a charter school in Boston, which was an amazing opportunity. Loved working with the kids, but wasn't really the fit for me. And I ended up applying to go to law school. As I think back, I can't really remember the moment that I made that decision, if I'm being completely honest with you. But I ended up back at Boston University, went to law school there. And I had the true fortune of joining the criminal law clinic. And it is probably one of the most defining and formative experiences that I've ever had in my life. And I think that will probably be true if you ask me the same question, in 50 years. Because there's a rare moment where you find yourself doing something and you realize that it's what you're supposed to do. And, I talk to my friends all the time, and not everybody gets to have that moment or hasn't had it yet. And I found myself in the Boston Superior Court as a 2L, standing next to a woman I don't remember what she'd been accused of, and arguing, for her release in front of the judge. And the courtroom was quiet. And there was such an intense and overwhelming feeling in that. And I wasn't nervous. I was hyper-focused on the advocacy. And what really caught me was the feeling of my client next to me, like I could feel her proximity to me. And there was such a transferal of trust and power. Mm-hmm. And that feeling right there, I think, has kind of explained everywhere I've ended up since then. Yeah. It truly is. So if I had to kind of pinpoint how I ended up where I am, it's that moment in that courtroom in Boston. But that's kind of, I guess, the best answer I can give to that.
So I get that, because I can relate to that. For me, if I am in a high pressure sort of situation, and you can't think about yourself. It's no longer about you. And if the cause is big enough, it's bigger than you, then I think that's when you rise to the occasion. I think that's when you feel the most alive, right? And I think that's an addicting feeling. I think that's called passion, and I think people that go through law school and kind of go through the motions and don't have that moment sometimes end up being lost for a while, until they're hit with something, as overwhelming as that feeling. And I meet unhappy lawyers all the time, by the way, so I kind of know. I'd be like, I wish I could take back all the time I went to law school and now I'm stuck. But I know a passionate attorney when I see one, and you certainly have that quality. Did you, when you were in law school, obviously what was your undergrad?
I was you can probably hear my dog licking her bowl. Oh, wow, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I have a 2-year-old boxer who is, I'm just destroying a bowl of water next to me right now. But
well, usually I have a 2-year-old son that's screaming around the house. And I tell everybody that it's my kids. So I totally don't worry.
I completely get it. I listen to all these podcasts who, at least during the pandemic, they talk about how they're like sitting in their closet trying to record their episode. Right. And now I kind of get it. But I studied international relations when I was in undergrad. And I actually did 5 years at Boston University because I was running track. And I redshirted a year, which means I had an extra year eligibility. And so I kind of got to decide what I wanted to do for my 5th year. And I've always loved to read. I've loved to read. And so I ended up getting my master's in African-American literature, kind of my 5th year that I was there, which was just an amazing opportunity, an incredible time, and it's interesting that I did that before I went to law school, because it was probably the most writing that I'd ever done in my my education. It was just in the library, constantly reading, writing, and creative writing. It was a really cool experience, and I think in some ways, as I think back, it's kind of played into the way that I write, think, and read. At least in the context now. So yeah.
So I have a degree in international relations.
So my claim to fame is I was one class behind AOC at Boston University in the international relations department, which is probably the coolest thing that I could say about my international relations degree. But it was, it was really cool. It's the liberal arts degrees are useful, and you never really know exactly where you're going to end up going with them. But I'm a history buff, and so it was a good time. Yeah,
that's awesome. I enjoyed my time, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to be either. I thought I was going to go to law school, but I was a mom very young, and so I didn't get an opportunity, but I thoroughly enjoyed my education and coming from Eastern Europe and sort of being, always thinking I wanted to work for the UN or I wanted to do something in foreign policy. I thought that was the path. But even though it didn't lead to any of that, I still very much enjoyed really getting into the history piece and actually learning a lot from the Western perspective, because I got my early education back in Eastern Europe. So I kind of get to see both sides. It was interesting. How was it working for Miami-Dade Public Defender's Office? You were there for 3 years?
Just over 3 years. Yes, I started I moved to Miami from Boston in 2017. Mm-hmm. And then I started with the Haggard Law Firm in November of 2020. So just over 3 years. And I took that job on a leap of faith. I moved to Florida from the Northeast, which is like moving from, I don't know, Alaska to, and just a completely different experience. And it was one of the best decisions that I've made. I don't know how many times I can say that something was the best decision on the podcast, but those were the two. Those are the two things. But it was one of the best decisions that I ever made. And when you want to work in public defense, every county in the United States has an office. All the big cities have offices. I was drawn to the Miami office because of the intensity and the passion and the client-centeredness of it. And it's so incredibly trial focused, and it's trial focused, not on a attorneys want to get trials to learn skills level, but on a utilitarian kind of platform that is the greatest good for the greatest number of clients, because strategically you can just overpower the system, by pushing those cases to trial, by advocating for your clients, by letting your clients have their day in court. It not only gives a voice to your clients, but the system, in the way it's designed, with its many flaws that we probably don't even have time to digress into today, it really can't sustain, that type of a practice of attorneys coming in and everyone wanting to try their cases. And, it results in a lot of acquittals. It results in a lot of dismissed cases. And it sends our clients home, whenever we can. So it was a amazing experience. I couldn't be more grateful for the time I spent there, what I learned there, the skills that I picked up, the clients that I met, the colleagues and the mentors that I had. It's changed my life for sure.
So people usually say when they've been a prosecutor that the intensity between that position and being a personal injury attorney is not the same. What do you think about that?
As a defense attorney, it depends what you mean by intensity.
So criminal cases, the stakes are really, really, really high, right? Sure. Personal injury, and again, depends on the kinds of cases you try. Of course, stakes are high, but there's that intensity that comes with being in a, in trial, trying a criminal case versus a personal injury and arguing for damages. So,
there can be, and when your client is facing prison or jail time and you're thinking about liberty, there is a immense pressure that comes with that, because this is your client's life. But the absolute same is true when you're talking about a personal injury or wrongful death case, And I think about our clients at the Haggard Law Firm who their lives are on the line. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. If you have a quadriplegic client and this case, might be the reason why they do or do not have, the ability to have a home health aid, to have a wheelchair ramp, to have a wheelchair capable vehicle, in a wrongful death case, our clients whose, that kid might be able to go to college and have it paid for, to buy a house, to move, to travel the world, to do things, and be given something because they've lost their parent, You know, and you grew up without your father, you grew up without your mother, and you kind of had that on you as a child. And when you turn 18, you're going to get a little bit of a head start, you know, and we can give this to you. And so I think it's how you frame it. But I do absolutely think, and I think that the sentiment is true with all my colleagues at the Haggard Law Firm, that our clients' lives are on the line. And unless you can realize that, it's I guess what I mean is you have to understand that your clients' lives are on the line in order to apply that same intensity, you know?
Right. So how do you prime the pump, right? Because so this is all in the way that you frame it, or in the way that you see a case, and you take that case on, and the breath you breathe into this case. Like, how do you get yourself sort of pumped for trial and focused? Like, what's your, I think a lot of lawyers, young lawyers, would be interested to know sort of your style and how you get ready for trial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the most important thing is the first conversation that you have with your client every time, whether it was in criminal or here in civil, because what kind of primes you for trial is your relationship with your client. Absolutely. You know, because you have to know your client's story. And when you know your client's story and you feel their story and you feel their pain and you understand their life, you know, everything else falls in line. Everything else is you know, is easy to come by, I think. But to really be able to encapsulate somebody's experience into a closing statement, or to effectively persuade a jury in, you know, Broward County, or you might be in Marion County. You know, you can't do that unless you truly understand your client. And your client won't really give you the opportunity to do that to your fullest unless they trust you.
Right.
And so those first conversations, and it's one of the biggest lessons that I took from the public defender's office, was client trust. It's everything. And for me, at least, kind of transitioning into the wrongful death, personal injury world, you know, it's very difficult to kind of convey your client's story and the pain and the history and the family and the trauma, unless you really can understand them, you know, unless you can go up to their house, sit down with them, talk with them, see the room that their son, you know, used to sleep in, see the artwork that their son used to create, you know, look at the bed as it was the morning that he left the house, never to come back, you know. And until they let you into that room, you can't get that. And if you can't get that, you can't communicate that. And so that's, and it not just helps you tell their story, but it motivates you and it energizes you, because it's not a case, right? It's a family. You know, it's a friend. It's a person that you talk to every day. It's a text message that you get every week, you know? And it's just, in my opinion, at least, it's the most vital part of prepping yourself for the trial is that first conversation.
Interesting. Yeah. So obviously you don't have one case, you have many cases. And you have to have these really, like, you have to be focused and making sure that first impression is good, that you connect with your client. And you have to do that for all these cases that you're working on. Do you take work with you at home after, you know, you leave your office? I mean, because some of these cases, you know, are sad cases, and, you know, you kind of live in that energy until the case is typically resolved. And so how do you process your work, whether it's, you know, during the week, or like, how do you make sure you can take a break emotionally, so to speak?
You know, it's tough work to take an emotional break from. And, you know, my clients don't get an emotional break. You know, our clients don't get an emotional break. You know, I think most recently about Thanksgiving and Christmas. And as soon as I woke up in the morning, the first thing that I thought about was particularly the moms on my wrongful death cases, whose daughters and sons are not there, and what they're going through and what they're feeling. and I text them, I call them. It's impossible for me, at least, to not bring it home with me, because it's not a job.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a job. It's not a 9 to 5. The work that we do is, our clients' lives have been changed for the worse already by the time that they come and meet us.
Right.
And you in a lot of ways, you kind of you take on some of what they're experiencing, and or at least I feel very responsible for making sure that justice is done for them, for their family, and for their, for that legacy. There is probably the incredibly well-adapted attorney out there who walks in the door of their house and, kind of metaphorically drops everything and is cleansed and, doesn't think about it the rest of the night. But I have not met that attorney. And I don't know that attorney, I think that one of the reasons we do what we do is because we can't really let it go, and I think that that's one of the reasons that makes us who we are as plaintiffs attorneys, and especially at the Haggard Law Firm, at least with the guys that I work with. I mean, you can't let that go. How can you forget? And how can you, really create that space? So I don't know if I've answered that question, because I don't have the answer to that.
Sure. No, I mean, a lot of the lawyers that I meet, they become, good lawyers I meet, right, that I'm always like drawn to. Wow, you got this verdict, and tell me about the story. And they tell the story of the client and how close they were to the client, and it was just personal, right? But I always, I'm sort of always trying to observe and understand the personalities that are in the space that obviously always rise to the occasion, and how they kind of strike life, work balance, because that's an important piece, right? Because you're serving, right? And it's great that you're serving, but there is also a component of self-preservation in the process of, serving. And I think that comes with self-care and family care and all of this other stuff. So it's there is no clear answer. I haven't gotten a clear answer on that, but I'm always curious to know how people think about it or, contemplate it.
Yeah, so I can speak to that, because I do think that one thing is, I've surrounded myself with people in my life who understand what I do and how strongly I believe in the work that I do, and how hard that I work at it, and who very delicately, try to break me away sometimes. And, it's, I moved to Miami from Boston, and I moved here with one of my best friends who also worked at the public defender's office. And she and I had interned together in DC, and a bunch of overlaps in terms of the criminal justice world. And she's doing amazing work and kind of policy stuff now. But we both moved to Miami together and have kind of created this community and family down here. And so I have these people in my life that constantly are like, hey, what are you doing? It's 10 o'clock. I'm like, oh, I'm doing this. They're like, okay, well, there's this new series on Netflix. I don't know if you know what Netflix is. It's on the TV, which is like probably that big thing on your wall that you haven't turned on in 3 weeks. But click the remote, that little thing on your couch, and why don't you sit down, watch something. But it's and I think that's the best way that I can answer it is I have the people in my life that kind of insert themselves when they know that I need it. Because it is difficult for me to draw that line, and I don't always strike that balance naturally, and I don't know that I ever will, but I hope to continue to surround myself with people that will force it upon me, and I will, and I know I will graciously accept. So I hope,
I hear that, and I understand that, and here I am 10, 11 years later of doing what I do in this business. And every day I'm working at creating space to acknowledge my needs, my personal needs, because outside of being a mom and a wife and a business owner and a podcaster and all these other things, I want to nurture my own essence. I want to understand myself. I'm always evolving. I'm always changing. So I have, as I've matured, I would say in the past, 5 years, I've been a lot more aware of my own personal development and growth, because otherwise I just, you lose your mind, right? You can,
Yeah.
especially when there's children in the picture, it's a lot more complicated. But focus back to you. I mean, I hear from law firms across the country that it is really hard to find and keep qualified attorney women in their 30s. This is sort of like a known fact, right? That it's really hard to, you want to bring in a woman and a minority woman, and you want to develop them, you want to keep them, and apparently it's a very hard thing. What do you think about that? Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, my first thing is, my opinion, they're probably not bringing in enough minority women to give an accurate statistic to that, would be my first kind of leap at it. But I think that the environment is important, and where you work is important. And, if you want to keep people, you have to give people a reason to want to stay with your law firm, and, it's 2022, and women and minority women, and especially minority women lawyers, there's a lot of places that we can work, and we know that there's a lot of firms that would be interested in bringing us in, in some ways you could say it can be a bit of a kind of a seller's market, and when you have a lot of choices, I think, from the perspective of a law firm, I think it's important to think about what you are providing to this person. And I can only speak from, I think, personal experience. I'm the only woman at my law firm, the only woman attorney at my law firm, and I'm the only Black person at my law firm. And it was something, and I was nervous about that. I won't lie, that I was nervous about that, because it's such a stark difference from what I was experiencing at the public defender's office. I was a little bit worried about how I would be received and kind of what the transition would be like. And when I started the job, it was probably the most pressing thing to me was, what is it going to be like? Is it going to be okay? Is it going to be comfortable? And it really, I can't speak to the industry. I can only speak to the Haggard Law Firm and the guys that I work with, but they have been, truly phenomenal. Truly phenomenal. And I recognize on a regular basis that it's a gift, and it's rare, because I have a lot of friends that are in their 30s, that are Black women, that are attorneys, that have a very hard time finding a fit at a law firm where they feel accepted and received and heard, and valued. You met me at FJA in October, which was less than a year of me working at the Haggard Law Firm. And I was speaking with Michael Haggard to a seminar of plaintiffs' attorneys. And, he's just taken me in and given me a voice and given me a platform, and it's been, I do pinch myself sometimes. I really do, because it's not an opportunity that's given enough people that look like me. And I do not doubt that there are people that are probably more deserving than me that should have had positions like this a long time ago. But I say that to say, there's a big difference also between kind of the small firm environment and large firm environments, I think. And, the Haggard Law Firm is a very small boutique firm, and I think it has a much more kind of unique culture and identity within our interactions than a 50, 60, 100 plus attorney law firm, which can be a very, very difficult environment. But I think that, it's law firms bring in, people like me and maybe ask themselves the question of what can they do for me instead of necessarily asking what can I do for them. And I think that can create quite a bit of friction and conflict.
Mm-hmm. I am, not a lawyer, but I am, in the space as a business owner and offering, services to law firms. And when I joined, I was in my mid-20s when I joined the industry, and I really didn't know what to expect. And my first sort of experience in the business was not very pleasant. Like, I worked for a group that didn't treat me very, very well. And in fact, when I left, they wanted to sue me and all this other craziness. And I was, as a 26-year-old, very intimidated and very scared, right? But also desperate. I was a single mom and needed a job. And this industry seemed like it had a lot of opportunities, but it motivated me to just go on my own and not work for someone. And it was probably the best decision I ever made. And so I can speak as a woman in this business. While there can be some perceived ceilings and there can be there's bad apples everywhere, right? I think the industry's sort of attitude towards women is that they want to bring in more women. They want to have more attorneys, women and minorities and business owners. And I get a lot of support from people I meet all around the country. But I also know that the facts are facts, and the facts are that there aren't enough women in positions of power, and especially leadership positions, whether it is personal injury or being a partner in a firm, or if you're practicing in mass torts, which I do a lot of work in that area, that these women aren't, there aren't many. But then I also hear, we want more women, we want to bring them in. So there is this disconnect, and I have been dwelling on this. I've been thinking and reflecting on this, and I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole. Okay, so let's just establish it is a white male dominated patriarchy. We're mostly hyper competitive men who want to hit the pinnacle of the dominance hierarchy they're in, will gladly work 70, 80 hours a week, right? And forego relationships, marriage, children until their 40s and 50s, right? And then you have women who go through college and law school and they bust their butts and they go through college and law school with flying colors, excellent grades, become lawyers, enter the workforce, and by age 30 have to decide if they want to compete with these hyper-focused men and competitive men, industrial men, or start a family and have a quality of life. And I might be canceled for saying this because cancel culture is real, but I think being a trial lawyer I think this could be one aspect, not the reason, but one of the reasons that being a trial lawyer woman might not be as appealing to women as we think, because it is very, very demanding.
Yeah. I'm delicate to this because I can only speak to my experience. And, being a trial attorney is a very self-selecting industry because it is in and of itself, it's incredibly demanding. Mm-hmm. It is incredibly passionate. It's the work that you can't leave at the door. You know what I'm saying? And to what we were talking about before, it is the job that you cannot leave at the door, but to kind of push back a little, mm-hmm. Working at the public defender's office in Miami, which is probably the most trial intense criminal defense office in the United States, and it was majority women, and not just, young women who are just gotten out of law school and were kind of cutting their teeth. In their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, women that had been there for their entire career and just greatly outdominated the men in the office. That's not to say that that's the case everywhere, but
Yeah.
I think that, you know, it's tough. You know, I'm 31, 32 in 21 days. And, you know, I'm a single woman, you know, I live by myself. And, you know, I do throw myself into my work, you know.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Can you sustain, how many hours a week do you work?
Oh, I don't know. That's an impossible question to answer.
Okay, but say you work 50 hours a week.
No, I probably work closer to at least 80. I would say 80, probably somewhere around there.
Okay. All right. Could you sustain working 80 hours a week for the next decade or two?
I don't know, but I don't know. That's a hard question, right? I don't know what my life would look like. And here, and this is what I think, but this is the crux of what we should be getting at, I think, is what is important to you. Right. You know, what is important to you? And if what is important to you is, having a robust, a life, being a mom, having all these other things, like if that was what was important to me right now, then I would say, yeah, working 80 hours a week, that's not sustainable for 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing that I also know is that I try not to fix myself to what I'm going to be doing, or who I am, in the future, because it's a journey and I don't know, my life right now, allows me to work the way that I work and kind of accommodates the passion, the intensity that I have about my job. A passion and intensity that I think is required for the work that I do in a lot of ways. And I'm appreciative of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I guess the conversation is really about trying to understand sort of what happens when women lawyers enter the workforce, mm-hmm. and why don't we see them staying in positions and climbing, so to speak, because a lot of them, I think, just kind of either cut down hours or decide they don't want to make partner or whatever that may be. Yeah.
And I think this goes back to a long history of kind of gender roles, misogyny, and expectations that women that are thrust upon women. If you took a heterosexual, just hypothetically speaking, a heterosexual married couple, both of them are attorneys, both of them are passionate, dedicated, hardworking trial attorneys. They get married, they decide to have a kid. Mm-hmm. Okay. 9 times out of 10, the person that is going to be assigned to stay home, take care of the kid, or be expected to stay home, take care of the kid, is going to be the woman. Right. And if she goes back to work, and she's now competing with the guy who either didn't have kids, or his wife is at home working, staying with the kids, or his wife is taking care of all the home stuff, they have the extra hours. And so the imbalance is really just kind of a microcosm of misogyny and gender roles that we have in our society. And you see it kind of trickling down into this place where women are finding it harder to compete, right? Mm-hmm. And so that absolutely exists, and you can see that. I mean, it's not just the legal field,
No.
But it's but no, that's everywhere, 100%. And I think about my friends that are lawyers that have kids, and one of my closest friends is an attorney with 4 kids at home and works at a high-powered law firm in Boston, and I know she's going to hear me saying this, and is still busting it and doing everything that she can, and just killing the game, But she also has 4 kids, and is going home and taking care of 4 kids, and that is a job, 4 jobs in and of itself. And she is smarter, quicker, more talented than any man she could ever work for. But she will always have less time on her hands than they do, And I think that law firms value that time commitment, over ability, skill, passion, and efficiency. So
I mean, look, to try a case is a very, very demanding task, right? If you're going to say, I want to try 5, cases a year, 10 cases a year, how much time needs to go into that. I mean, that's a workload, and you know exactly what needs to go, whether you're doing that because you want to compete with yourself or because there is a demand, it's just very, very time consuming. So it's very, very interesting. I have had this discussion with women that are at the highest, that have achieved the highest levels of success in the space, and don't see a ceiling necessarily. Like, they feel they're very fierce, and but it's also obvious that they have devoted their life to their career.
Yeah.
And it's what they want, and it's what they thrive at, and it's amazing. It's just wanting to understand, how can we pull in more women and place them with firms like the Haggard Law Firm that are creating the space and the platform, giving women a voice, and highlighting them and making them feel like they truly do make a difference. They're needed. They're nurturing. The compassionate, side that we bring to the table is unique, and we can connect with people, I think, easier. So it's just wanting to sort of change that conversation and figure out how to make it easier for women to enter this workspace.
No, absolutely. And I think that it starts with, expectations, and what employers and the heads of law firms are expecting of their women attorneys. And kind of like I was saying, if the expectation is you have to work X hours, or you have to be here 7 days a week, it's an unrealistic and untenable expectation. And immediately, because of the society that we live in,
Mm-hmm.
right? Women are going to have a harder time fitting that mold if they are married with children, because more often than not, they're going to be the ones that are saddled with, taking care of the kids, with kind of taking, managing the home and things like that. And so really, I mean, if you're talking about reshaping the mold, it is about expanding the minds of the managing partners, of the people that are running these places, that, I do think, to kind of put it in context, COVID may be helpful in a lot of ways, because I think that in everything that COVID has changed, one thing that it really has changed for the better is the way that we work, and where we work. I think that millions of people have proven that you can be as effective working from home, whether it's every day, or, in the mornings, or, after 12 o'clock, as you are from the office, and that you do not have to be physically in this office present in order to work. Especially in the legal field, where it's not necessarily as collaborative if you're working at like a marketing firm or advertising firm, where I can imagine the collaboration and being kind of in the midst of the, kind of a melting pot of ideas all the time is really crucial. In a lot of ways, at the public defender's office, it was the same. It's a melting pot that you have to have all the time. But a lot of law firms, I think, are benefiting from the remote environment. And, speaking from my understanding of my friends that are women attorneys that have families and kids that they're, responsible for and taking care of, it's been fantastic. It's been fantastic. And I think it's kind of even that playing field a little bit, right? Because that idea of, if you're not here, you're not working, is a little bit, it's kind of gone. It's kind of gone. And I think that for all of the terror and fear that COVID has brought to us, and there's certainly somebody more qualified that could speak to this, but I do tend to think that it has created somewhat of a more even playing field in terms of the who's working where, when, hours, time, being in the office. That's very much, I think, a 2018 concept in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the amounts of conversations and times I've talked to lawyers, whether on the podcast or in person at conferences, saying it's just a very different environment now. And I think we're finally starting to, it's amazing what happens when you trust people with their time, because you can say, look, this is what needs to be done, and you can do it anytime you want. So if you want to take 3 days off and you want to work 2 days, 10-hour days, and get your work done, I don't care. You can get it done whenever you want. My husband does this at his company, where people have an unlimited amount of time that they can take off. If they want to take a whole week off, they can, but they know what they have to do and what the deadlines sort of are. And so as long as they can manage their time effectively, there's no problem. And I think it's incredible what happens when you give people the ability to make those decisions and choices instead of treating them as, kindergarten, children. You have this time to get your work done. And then, because we do need that freedom to sort of figure out what works for us. And I've been working from home before COVID, and obviously I travel a lot, but when I'm not, I always just enjoyed working from the comfort of my house. I could get the kids to school. I could have a little time for me in the morning. I can get my work done, but I feel in control of my day, of my time. And that gives me great pleasure versus when I worked for someone, where I had to be in the office at a certain time, drop my daughter off like in a frenzy or panic every morning, as most parents do. And so I think it's important. I think it's important that the industry allows or nurtures women who are competitive, who want to achieve, but nurture sort of and understand the needs that come with raising the family or having other hobbies or doing other things to allow you to maintain your quality of life. I think it's very important because another study that, a study that I had come across showing that, attorneys especially are prone to having high levels of depression and anxiety and all sorts of other, health issues because of the amount of work and the high stress work and the amount of time they put in. And so there are conferences sometimes that all they focus on is the health and the well-being of the lawyer, to make sure that if you're going to serve others, that you're also, taking care of yourself. I think that's really, really important.
And I can say as a young attorney, I started practicing law when I'm doing math now, which is going to kind of embarrass me, but I started practicing law when I was 27, 26, and I absolutely have always thought about, how do I strike a balance of where is my balance? And especially because of the type of work that I've always done. I went from the public defender's office, which was, I would work, the intensity of my work now is really, I worked like this when I worked at the public defender's office as well. And, a lot of it, and I'm told this all the time by a good friend of mine, is, my work demands a lot, but I also demand a lot of myself. And I recognize that a lot of, at least the time that I put in is kind of self-inflicted in a lot of ways,
Well, because you're a very competitive person. I mean, it's obvious.
I am, but I also am I have a constant fear of not showing up, of not succeeding, of not, it is
Is it like a fear of failure?
Oh, absolutely. I would say it is a paralyzing fear of failure, excuse me. Absolutely. It's, and I wonder this all the time, is it does everybody else feel this too?
Yes.
Fear of failing. And, I think the more existential question about it is am I afraid of failing for myself? Am I afraid of failing for the people that know me? Am I afraid of failing for the people that believe in me? Is it where that is coming from? I haven't quite identified, but there is an absolute fear of letting myself down, of letting my colleagues down, of letting my clients down, of not living up to the expectation that I think, I've set for myself and that people have set for me, and it's very difficult for me, at least, to not become hyper focused on that. And as a young Black woman in a very white male dominated industry, that box is packed full of emotions and complications and fear. And I mean, it is such there's so much wound into what I expected myself. It would be too much to unpack. So it can be a lot. Absolutely. It can be a lot.
When I started this podcast, it was during COVID, and that was because I was just, deprived of speaking to people and colleagues. And I would go to these conferences and I have friends and we see each other all the time. And I also just love understanding how people think and operate, because it's, let me tell you, this podcast has helped me take the edge off, because I am very much like that. I have two big fears in life, and it doesn't matter what aspect it is: fear of failure and fear of rejection, right? But what I have found through this podcast and taking the time to explore and sort of kind of scratch the surface is people who are seasoned, lawyers, professionals, 20, 30 years in this career, still have those same fears. Some of the best ones say that they feel like an imposter. They have an imposter syndrome, that at some point somebody is going to finally discover that they're a fraud.
Oh, girl, listen, when you say imposter, you're preaching to the choir. So listen, that is like, but you know what the funny thing is? It's so funny. Like I listened to I don't know if it was a podcast or there's a defense attorney in Miami. His name is David Marcus. He's got an amazing podcast that he does where he brings on criminal defense attorneys and kind of talks about their cases that they've done. And he did some type of a speaking engagement recently. And in my mind, David Marcus is like, it, and he was talking about imposter syndrome. And I'm like, wait. What could you possibly know about imposter syndrome? But it's true, because I think that if everybody just at once came out and screamed out their insecurities, I mean, it would just, everybody would be like, oh man, it's not just me. But it's true, because imposter syndrome is real. It is really real. And it's subjective, it's silent. You feel like it's invisible, and then you're fighting against yourself. Not realizing that everyone around you in their own way has this manifestation, no matter what successes they've had, no matter what they've done, is feeling the same. And there have been a few moments recently where I've realized that, people, that I'm not the only one. But there's a lot that goes into, at least for me, feeling like if I fail, it's not just about me. And, I don't think that this is unique to me. I think that if you are a minority person in a predominantly, heterosexual, white, male dominated industry or world, which I think we for the most part live in, it's not just me. It's not just me that's working there. It's not just my reputation. It's the decision to hire me. It's the decision to hire someone that looks like me. It's the people that might come after me, and it's not just within my work environment, but the people that look in, other law firms, so there's so much that goes into that for me, at least. And I don't feel necessarily like an individual. I feel like in some ways an identity, and there's always a concern about, the failure is not my own in some ways. I think I have a very deep concern about giving I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I mean, look, what you're saying, and I really can empathize and understand is that there is not only this pressure to perform, there is this pressure to want to make sure that you fit in, that you're accepted, that is authentic, that is real, that your efforts and what you put in are reciprocated, and we internalize all of this day in and day out, and we get tangled up in our heads, and it's, like you said, you can't really control sort of what's going on, and we know what the social conditioning looks like, and it's there, and you're carrying, and I'm carrying just, decades and centuries of poor treatment, to the gender, to the race. And it's like, we're sort of on the cusp of this. It's only been like less than 100 years that women can be in these positions of power in the history of humanity. And when you think about that, and you think you're in the cusp of this change, and there's just so much between the past, and we can't predict the future, and we don't know if these changes are happening from a good place, or you're questioning everything, and that can drive anybody crazy. And I think as a woman, it's there is that layer of complication, or not complication, but a layer of just wanting to understand that first you're human, and you're being seen as a human. And then, you're a woman that has different responsibilities from what a man would. And so seeing that, being aware of that, respecting that, giving each other flexibility, because, we're just operating a little differently. As you walk into a meeting and you leave a meeting, you want to make sure that, you're at ease. And I think finding that ease, finding that ability to be comfortable no matter what, whether you fail at a case, or you fail, or you let somebody down, or you let yourself down. It's all part of life. It's all part of evolving and contrast. What I've learned is I'm thinking, how do I just make sure I go through my day and I have no contrast?
Right.
And there's just no way.
No, absolutely. And there's two things that I wanted to say. And the first is, to be who I am and to work at the Haggard Law Firm, and with all of its success and the history and the legacy that it has.
Yeah.
I do and will always have, and this is not just because he's my boss, but have such a tremendous respect for Mike Haggard and for his father, and for Mike bringing me in, because it changes the game, and not just within the Haggard Law Firm, but for all of the firms that look to the Haggard Law Firm. And it, and he doesn't just bring me in. He, like I said, you met me at FJA. He puts me out there, and he promotes me, and he gives me a voice, which is, what we do as living is give people a voice. He's given me a voice and a platform, and a name to stand on, and it's significant. It's, I sometimes I think about it. It's really not just about the place that I work and what that means there, but I'll go places. I'll go to events, or, people will meet me and they say, oh, what do you do? And, I work at the Haggard Law Firm. Oh, really? Or they'll ask me, how do you know Mike Haggard? I'm like, funny story. I work for Mike Haggard. But the kind of the shock that people initially get when they recognize that this kind of, granted I look 15 years old, but this but this young Black woman, working for a firm like the Haggard Law Firm, I hope that it starts to normalize that more. And I hope that it inspires other law firms that are similarly situated to bring in people that don't look like them, right? Because it should happen on its own, but it won't. And that's the thing, and it won't, and people are sheep in a lot of ways, and they follow the herd. And, I think that having me with the Haggard Law Firm, or at least I hope that having me with the Haggard Law Firm not just benefits our clients and our firm, but I really do hope that other law firms are kind of like, why haven't we, brought in people that look different from us, so.
An example. I mean, look, Shelby, you are very impressive. And, I can say that hopefully we are starting to live in a world and see the change where it's your skill set, it's your ability that has you positioned where you are positioned. Ultimately, that yes, there should certainly be this effort to create space for people like you and people like me. But I think when you are so, you own your stuff, you're so good at what you do, whether it's there or anywhere else or on your own, you represent a significant part of this, of this culture, of this country. And I think the next 2 decades are going to be very, very different. I have a 14-year-old now that sees no color, sees no gender. These kids are like really experimenting. And it's sometimes I'm like, oh, what's going on, but there is like this sort of neutrality of like, I really do think that this movement has begun, and it's a powerful movement. And I think as women, we just need to be really empowered, whether or not we get acknowledged or positioned. We should demand, we should ask, we should enforce our sort of authority into any industry, any profession that we want. But ultimately, we all have to walk the walk, right? Sure. If you're effective in trial, you connect with your client and you do good for them, it shouldn't matter. Nothing else should matter. It's just that you're a badass. And you did that. So, and
it's absolutely, and it's there's so much that I think about, and there's a universe inside of my mind at any given point in the day. But one of the things that I'm always thinking about is, as minorities, we have to constantly, and especially when you're kind of elevated to a position of power, you have to question things about your legitimacy there that people that are part of the majority probably never think about, and I shouldn't have to ever question whether or not I ended up where I am because of my capabilities or because I'm good, but I am also Black. I'm also a woman,
I know.
And in the long term, I don't know the significance of what that means in the long term, and having to walk into a room and convince somebody that I am an attorney, that I am competent, that I am qualified, that I can represent them, and people don't get that.
Does it matter? Does it matter what they think?
You know what? It does in some ways, because we do incredibly demanding and difficult work that weighs on us in a lot of ways. And I think that it's important to try to minimize where you can the stress that can inflict.
But if you move through the world, let's say you could physically remove that chip, so to speak, like where you are not aware that you're being seen as a woman, as Black, in a white dominated. I mean, I saw the picture on the website, and it's very, it kind of takes you back for a minute, like just being completely honest, which there's nothing wrong with it. It's just new. It's you don't see that all the time, right?
Right.
But if you could move through the world without really thinking about that, yes, people are going to think that, but would it be easier for you, less of a spinning your wheels and trying to kind of take that with you, carry that, because that's heavy to carry around.
It kind of goes back to one of the things that you said, is that one of the reasons I spend so much time on my client relationships is it's vitally important for me. And it's also important because there is this kind of inherent level of distrust in the legal system in general. Yeah. And I think that there's always this inherent level of kind of, even in some ways, kind of a little bit of self-discrimination, in terms of who is your attorney, what do they look like, and one of the reasons I love being a public defender, one thing I loved about it is, you go into court and all of your clients are in custody, they're brought in handcuffs, and they're seated in the kind of the jury box in the courtroom. And I would go in and, I would sit down in the box with them. I talk to my clients, I talk to the other guys, and you kind of just develop a rapport. And there's always a moment during the calendar where you realize that everybody in there knows that you're the one that they want to represent you. And I always loved that, because they would see me doing my thing. They'd see me arguing. They'd see me, moving around the courtroom. And they'd start, asking me questions and things like that, because they could see you and watch you do the thing. And it's not about what you look like. It's about kind of living the act.
Well, I think that's what happens. I think when you're in flow and you're just so focused on, just uncovering sort of the essence of the work you're doing, for who you're doing it for, and people see that drive, that passion, that will draw anybody in, and I think you are in a venue, Miami being one of the most, I would say liberal, maybe not politically, so to speak, but in many other ways, a liberal venue. It's a playground, I think, and it could be a place where this is where things do start to change, and are not just change, but are actually normalized, and it's part of the culture, it's part of the trend, and I think that's what a lot of firms are looking to do. I know this, like, there is a huge effort from these law firms, big law firms around the country, wanting to bring in women and minorities, and they do want to change the culture because it is the right thing to do. And some do it for political reasons, and some do it for, authentic reasons. They actually, are open-minded, good-hearted people. But, it's just this maze you have to navigate, especially as a young woman, establishing yourself, which I think is probably the drive that you have, working 80 hours a week to fiercely establish who you are, what you do, why you do it, so that you can only fall back on your results ultimately, right?
And one reason I think it's also vitally important, and particularly in the practice that we have, is we do, quite a bit of negligent security work, and we're trial attorneys. We do anything from drownings, car accidents, construction accidents, but we do a lot of negligent security work, and we're representing a lot of victims of crime. And for all of the socioeconomic reasons in our country, and the majority of our clients in our negligent security cases are Black, and there is a vital importance of having a Black attorney involved in your case. There absolutely is. There is and I think it's something that law firms need to wrap their minds around more, is client relationships are everything.
Yeah.
And the way that you can understand your attorney, or feel like your attorney can understand you, is vitally important. And I think especially at the Haggard Law Firm and on our cases, having me sometimes, I'll get clients, sometimes I'll go to their house, and I love when they get it. Oh, okay. And it's a great feeling. It's a really cool feeling. I think for the rest of my life, one of the coolest things will be seeing that kind of surprise on a client's face when they realize that I'm Black, and and like the dynamic starts to shift a little bit. I'm like, all right, cool. But it's the whole thing. It's it's a universe of emotions and feelings and complications, and it's I don't know. I just, it's a lot of people probably don't go through this every day and think about these things and analyze these things. And, it is constant in my mind, and
Yeah,
it's,
me too.
it,
I'm always contemplating, and sometimes I'll be working a deal because obviously I hop from deal to deal, working from firm to firm, and I am very aware, sometimes to a fault, of how I'm being perceived. And many times, it's easily to open a door and get a meeting. And then, depending on what the pitch is, depending on what the deal is, and then I start seeing, how seriously people are taking me, in that process. And so I'm always analyzing this stuff, like constantly, to a fault, which is good that I get this podcast to channel some of this stuff, because like you said, when you are holding on to all this and you're trying to make sense of the world, but at the same time be as effective as possible for your client as you're navigating your own personal, sort of ideas and concepts about the world. And it's a lot, it's a lot.
It is. And, one of the greatest things about my job now, and same thing when I was at the public defender's office, is like, I just forge these amazing relationships with clients. And to give an example, yesterday, I spent probably 20 minutes on the phone with a young woman. And we were just talking about New Year's resolutions. And like, do we believe in New Year's resolutions? Are they meaningful? Is it really about just like leaving stuff behind, or is it about setting goals? I mean, truly, like, I don't even know if we actually got to anything about her case, but my clients become a part of me, and I have clients from the public defender's office who I talk to this very day. Some of whom are in custody and living very complicated lives, but the ability to relate to your clients, everybody at some point in their lives, if you've never felt what it's like to be an outsider or to be otherized, it's a disadvantage.
Yeah.
It's a disadvantage because there is a line, and unless you've ever lived on the other side of that line, you really can't understand what that's like. You can't empathize. You truly can't understand, I think, the true kind of the complexities and the nuances of not being, the it guy. I could consider friends in a different context, if I, wasn't, legally representing them, but they become people in your lives, and the ability to connect with them can be, case aside, it could change your life. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I ultimately think that what you focus on shapes your reality. And the more time you spend on finding reasons why you're not included or why you don't fit in, the more you see that, because it's everywhere, right?
Correct.
And so part of our personal work, for me at least, is to focus on, all the areas that I am very good at, the people that appreciate it, people that, like you said, when you have that client that just loves you and think the world of you, and you would do anything for them, right? You're all in. So, and speaking of attitude, and you brought up the New Year's resolution, I am very, very interested to hear what you think about New Year's resolution, because as a parent, I'm like always trying to find ways to motivate sort of my teenager and motivate myself. I'm like working on my vision board for the next year. And I do this every year. I used to go to a seminar in person, and I because of COVID now we don't, but I want to have clarity about what I'm going to do. What should I focus on? What can I focus my energy on? Is that something you consider, or is that?
Sort of. Sorry, I'm just plugging in my laptop.
I do tend to go long.
No, please. This is perfect. I love this topic. I love this topic because, I am a writer, and if I hadn't become an attorney, I would have been a writer, and I still in a lot of ways would love to be a writer. And my alter ego is an investigative journalist. Like, I listen to Reveal, I listen to all the podcasts, and like, yes, go. Because it's a lot of the same stuff, the same kind of like investigation, deceit, challenging authority. But I used to write on December 31st every year. What have I learned? What has it meant? What is the purpose? I spend so much time trying to understand like what the grander scheme of all of this is. What does this mean? Why am I here? What is the purpose? What makes it valuable? Am I wasting my time? I was telling you before we started about this podcast, 70 over 70, which I don't know if you're allowed to like plug another podcast when you're on a podcast, but I recommend your listeners listen to 70 over 70. They're just stories about life of these people that have lived obviously much longer than we have. And it leads me to constantly question, like if I ever have the privilege of being where I know to be the end of my life on my deathbed, and looking back and thinking about my life. How will these moments play into that? Will they matter? Will I be upset that I spent my time doing this? Will it feel impactful? Like, what will my emotion and my mindset be when I reflect? And I spend so much time now kind of thinking about that. But I've always kind of taken that approach to New Year's. I've dropped that approach as of recently. And at least this year, kind of what I went into the new year with was, what am I leaving behind? And what do I want to leave behind from the last year? And it could be kind of the unpredictability of the last couple of years that we've lived in, and being in a new work environment, and so much of my life has been in flux for the last 2.5 years, that the idea of setting personal goals just didn't really feel realistic. And
so you gave yourself a break.
I gave myself a break, sort of, but Harlem. Thank you. But I did think a lot about what I wanted to leave in 2021, which in some ways has been maybe more informative for me, because it's not where do I want to be, but what was not serving me, and it's been an interesting mindset for 6 days.
You journal about this?
I don't journal anymore. I wish I did. I used to, but I time-wise, I don't always have the time anymore, but I used to journal all the time. Sometimes like thank God for an iPhone and the note app. And sometimes if I have a thought, I'll kind of write something down there. But my wheels are constantly spinning for better and for worse. And I'm always thinking, if I'm not thinking about work, I'm kind of thinking about what I'm doing and how it fits. Like if this is some type of a puzzle, like where what is this piece, and is it supposed to go here? And it's I don't know. I always wonder if other people are grounded in who they are, where they're going, what they're doing, and why. Because I constantly feel like I'm I don't know. I don't know, so it's
the puzzle of life. I think, I've had to sort of fall back on just knowing, just trusting this is a journey. I very likely probably pick this, this journey, and I'm here and I want to make the best of it. And so, you go from being super, aware of your identity, of your ego, to relinquishing, surrendering all of that, and just believing that there's got to be a master plan that you're a part of, and there's a reason. And so just making sort of the best of every moment that you can, because I don't think anybody walks around knowing this stuff, You
can't. And the only thing I can really say is the most that I hope is that you can find the thing that brings you to life, that brings you to life, that makes you happy, that, and then you maximize that as much as you can, and so I feel really lucky that I've found the things in my life that make me happy. And, but it's a journey, and I hope I'm at my beginning of it. But
I mean, from an outsider, looking in, everything that you're doing and all of the thoughts that you're having and the fears and the insecurities. And I so agree with you. It would be so fun to just get a bunch of people in a room, maybe in this industry, and everybody gets on stage and talks about their insecurities.
Yeah.
And then you can see everybody for who they really are, right? Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
fun? I think that's a great idea.
It's honestly that experience I told you, I listened to that podcast with this guy that to me, I mean, it's like the creamsicle of defense attorneys, and to hear him talk about imposter syndrome. I mean, it was in some ways a little bit life-changing, because it's like, man, everybody has it, and it's encouraging. It's encouraging.
It helps. It helps you cope better with your own internal thoughts and how you look at the world. It's helped me, because I bring it up, and I am always saying, hey, am I the only one that's like dying on the inside when this happens, and this like when I'm cringing, like I'll look it up. I won't even watch my podcast. Like I can't, and my husband my husband will say, oh, how was your podcast today? I'm like, oh, honey, I think it was pretty great. And he's like, well, let's watch it. I'm like, no, you watch it. And so that is still there. And I'm aware of it. I can't see myself on screen or hear my own voice, because I'm like, oh, that's
in the same way. I've only because it's an incredible practice and really valuable. I've just started reading my own depositions. But I will never, I'm gonna tell you this right now, I will never watch my depositions. The idea of hearing my own voice or seeing myself, like I just like, and even on Zoom, it's strange, but when you take depositions on Zoom, like I turn my video off, because if I'm in a live deposition, I would never see myself taking it. I would never be looking at myself on camera, and being on the Zoom platform and having to look at myself, I'm like, it's just the whole thing is just distracting. But it's all, it's all going to fit in somewhere in the grander scheme. And, I am truly never going to forget how lucky I am to be where I am, and doing what I'm doing, and to love what I'm doing. And one of the, I think it's a Harry Potter quote. It is a Harry Potter quote. There's a part where there's this young group of wizards that are kind of, learning to, teach themselves all these skills and all these spells. And Harry Potter says to the group, every great wizard in history was where we are right now. Students learning, try to figure it out. If they did it, why can't we? And it's a little bit corny, but it is really true. I always remind myself that I am, and hopefully forever will be, a student of my craft. And I'm not an imposter, I'm a student. And I'm always learning, and always trying to get better. And maybe it's that aspect of feeling like an imposter that pushes us so far.
Absolutely. I think sometimes our fears have a two sort of fold purpose. I mean, obviously, in order to not be status quo, you need to be driven by the idea that if you stay status quo, you die. I mean, you can't, right? And so I think there is the positive of that, but not to the point where it paralyzes you and you can't function, which I think a lot of people have that and need to overcome it. So Shelby, look, you've been so honest and so real and raw, and I appreciate you so much. I'm so glad that you accepted my invite, that you allowed me to ask all these personal questions. And I could do this all the time. And in fact, if I'm in Miami, I'm going to call you and we're going to have a glass of wine and continue talking about philosophy and life and what it all means.
Absolutely. I was telling you before that I'm a massive podcast buff, and I've listened to the Savage Lovecast, Death, Sex, Money for I don't know how many years. And so the idea of being real and raw, it just seems very that's a podcast to me. And so maybe I set myself up, but it's been really cool. And I think that kind of getting to the real emotion of what we go through and how we think about ourselves and our practice doesn't happen enough, at least not with each other as attorneys. And I think it's refreshing and important for people to know that it's a journey, it's difficult, we're all going through it. And the more that we can kind of understand it, see it within ourselves and communicate with each other about it, at least for my generation, hopefully it leads to a better and brighter legal profession. And, so. Yeah.
Well, you're certainly part of that revolution. And so thank you for being you, and keep doing what you do. I am certain I'm going to hear about you and your results. And I'm going to be, always will be a huge fan, because you're just a delight, a really great person and hopefully I can call you a friend. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.